Sam Harris is a neuroscientist, and he is quite lucid and effective in debates, but sometimes surprisingly stuck. I'm going to be discussing his mindfulness project. He has an app that he promotes and seems to be popular, seems to get positive reviews. I'm going to be one of the few people who gives a critique of it. It's more of a critique of mindfulness, which is a meditation technique, I guess. It's become quite popular in psychology and the New Age movement, I guess, and even in business.
I'm curious, what do you believe happens when we die?
There's certainly good reason to doubt that you, as you experience yourself most of the time, as the English-speaking subject who has the episodic memories you have of your life, that entity floats off the brain and goes elsewhere, right? And that's the expectation that most people have who believe in souls, right?
Floats off the brain. So that's a materialist point of view, and he's quite a materialist. Though surprisingly, he's into this meditation stuff, and he talks to non-duality gurus. So we need to question our assumptions, so we shouldn't start with the assumption that it floats off the brain. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I think it's an open question.
Right, and when you hear people use so-called near-death experiences to justify a belief in an afterlife, it's that kind of arithmetic that's being done. And then there's some story about how they met entities or met members of their own family who had died, and they're, so if you can recognize your grandma and still understand English and then still have a memory of the life you're leaving, all of those are modes of cognition that we know a fair amount about at the level of the brain now, and we know they can be disrupted.
The interesting thing about near-death experiences is that people see dead people who have died. They don't see people who are currently living. Like in a dream, we see people who are currently living or people that we don't know and all that sort of thing. But in a near-death experience, the subject sees people that have died. So that's an interesting point in favour of the near-death experience, because it seems strange that consciousness or whatever would only pick out those who have died. And then communicating in English or in whatever language. So I've had like a spiritual experience where there was a being and like a Asian-looking deity guy. And he was communicating in it was a psychic communication. So it wasn't verbal, it was like thought forms. It's very hard to explain unless you've experienced it, and that's the kind of way that people nearly always talk about near-death experiences. They say it's kind of psychic. And he's saying that if you probe the brain, or he's going to be saying if you probe the brain and that sort of thing, you trigger thoughts and stop thoughts and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't prove anything. It's definitely an important data point, but it doesn't prove anything. There's in a survival instinctual viewpoint, which is that the brain's job is to do very basic things focused on survival. Just because you can interfere with that aspect of the person doesn't mean you've interfered with the whole person. Another point I'd make is that near-death experiences have two common aspects, which is love and light. But it's interesting that people who report these experiences say they had sudden knowledge and sudden happiness. So this kind of suggests that maybe society and these bodies, those two contexts, might be the cause of all our problems, and it's not the individual themselves.
If you interrupt one part of neuronal function, you lose, let's say, your capacity to understand English, right?
Mind versus brain, what's the difference?
Well, I mean, the mind on some basic level is what the brain is doing. And
That's quite a good definition there. But it's still a materialist point of view. You could put it like, if we are just the brain, then the mind is what the brain is doing. But if we're more than just the brain, then it could be what consciousness and the brain together are doing.
you can't get to a place where you are standing upstream of the parsing of the sounds I'm making. I'm just making a bunch of small mouth noises, right? And I mean, and you know the difference when you're in the presence of someone who's speaking a language.
You can actually have experiences where you are upstream of language. I've experienced this where they're speaking English, but you don't know what they're saying. So that's possible. I'm just saying that's possible. You might say that's crazy, but I've experienced. I'm sure many other people would have too. Perhaps it's like a timeless state of consciousness, like you're not recording. It feels like a level. It's like you can be up here and then you can dip down into normal consciousness. And I'm not saying that that's superior, or that if you go to a superior state of consciousness you never understand language. I'm just saying that it can happen.
I would argue the only important thing in the universe is the fact that the lights are on as what we are here subjectively, which is consciousness.
It's a common popular idea in Eastern mysticism and New Age spirituality, and in some aspects of philosophy. I would say that potential is the other vital factor. Consciousness is useless without potential, without something to perceive. So potential can manifest and you can perceive it as consciousness, and you have the potential to do things. So I'd say our identity, essential identity, would be consciousness plus potentials, and I'd say both those things are the most important things in the universe, and they require each other to get any value.
It can't experience happiness. It can't be deprived of happiness. It can't be creative. It can't. So
So he's talking about happiness there. So I say happiness is the meaning of life, and you find that it always comes up whether people say something else is the meaning of life or not. It circles around to happiness, because everything we do is ultimately for some form of happiness.
all you have is your experience and your possible experiences, and
see how potential snuck in there. All you have is your experiences and potential experiences. Where do they come from? From your own potentials and the potentials of the universe and other people. And the problem with focusing only on consciousness is that it makes it very dry. It's very rational, reductionistic, and all that.
we are in a position with one another where we can affect each other's states of well-being and our opportunities to experience further well-being in the future, and that matters. And our conversation around that is our conversation around morality and ethics and politics.
I think morality is just a complete waste of time. Now it is. In the past, it was kind of a useful tool to keep people in control, while we sort of tried to figure out what the hell to do with ourselves, because we had no instruction manual and no clues about how we even got here. Morality is only needed if we think human beings are lacking and flawed. And you've always got to keep them controlled. But if we tune into the innate happiness and goodwill of being, then we only feel like doing good things, and we're not desperate to find substitutes for innate happiness. And at that point, morality becomes redundant. But society says we are lacking and flawed, like lacking happiness, lacking intelligence. They're the two common ones, and flawed morally is the most common one. And while we think that we're lacking happiness, then we chase happiness and then we harm others. But if we don't think we're lacking happiness and we tune into innate happiness, and then we don't desperately chase happiness and we're no longer dependent, and so harm will disappear. But that idea's got to spread. Well, mainly we've got to spread the idea that we might not be lacking and flawed, which is easy to prove. I mean, of all the creatures in the universe, how is it that we're the only ones that are lacking and flawed? Doesn't make any sense, right? In fact, we're superior to other animals. We're smarter, and we can do much more good.
You notice that you're lost in thought almost every moment of your life, and much of your thinking has this mediocre character of causing you to worry about the future and regret the past, and just feel a baseline dis-ease with life.
So firstly, some people don't think all the time. You can look it up online. I'm not saying they're superior or inferior, I'm just reporting that information. He's saying that thinking can make us worry about the future and have regrets about the past. But we've got to go deeper than that. So he just wants to break the link between thoughts and feelings, or between feelings and consciousness. But we've got to go deeper than that. He said there's a superficial version of mindfulness, but I think the normal version of mindfulness is very superficial, because it starts with, ouch, those thoughts hurt. How can I not be hurt by them anymore? But deeper than that is, ouch, those thoughts hurt. Where did they come from? And you'll see, if you investigate, you'll see that it's basically karma. Like, in the past you chased after various forms of happiness or security or stability or change. And while doing that, you hurt someone, which is regrets, or you failed, and then you have worries in the future. So if we dig deeper, we say, well, why am I chasing those things, happiness and whatever? And you'll see that it's because you assume that you don't have it. And then you go deeper again. Well, why do I assume I don't have it? It's because that's what society conditioned us to believe since childhood.
Not to mention the bigger concerns about disease and whether your child is sick, and we're thinking we're plunged into thought in each moment, and we don't notice it. And until you learn to be mindful, you can't notice it, and then you are hostage to the emotional and behavioral imperatives of that thought.
Notice he mentioned worrying about whether your kid's sick, right? So there's happiness and survival, which are the two core motivations. And survival is just preparation for happiness, but you're worried about the kid surviving and you're worried about the kid's happiness. They're feeling sick, they're not happy. So you'll find that those are the two core motivations. So he also mentioned about being hostage to those thoughts. Well, that's definitely true. People are hostage to them. Not everyone, but people are hostage to them. So I suppose there are two responses. You can do the superficial one, which is like mindfulness, but you'll just stay on the run if you do that. And I think that's a big problem with the world, is that people sort of begin to walk on the path of reality, finding the root cause of our problems, but then they just find a quick fix solution along the way and they just cling to that. So that just delays the inevitable.
We need thought. I mean, thought is the way we organize our lives and form plans and understand what's happening.
Thought is creative like that, but it also limits us as well. When he's talking about understanding, it's understanding according to the instinctual survival imperatives. Like the brain has evolved to focus on things that aid with survival. So it narrows, our consciousness is narrowed by the brain.
It's possible to recognize thought as a stream of appearances in consciousness, and to recognize that consciousness is the kind of the prior condition of their arising.
If you look, you'll see after positive and negative experiences pass by, your essential sense of awakeness, awareness, perceiving is untouched. And that it's basically untouched since childhood. What's changed is experience, but not the experiencer or consciousness.
You can actually break the link between thought and psychological suffering. So if the thought is an anxiety-producing thought, right? You can notice this whole process where a thought arises and you feel anxious, and that feeling of anxiety in your body, when once uninspected, begins to generate the motive for further thoughts along those lines. So you're thinking about the thing that makes you anxious, and because you're anxious, you're finding the anxiety intolerable. You've got resistance to feeling this feeling, and you're thinking about, like, how can I get out of this?
All that's after the horse has bolted. And the anxiety, well, what's the cause of the anxiety? I mean, if you're going to speak on stage or something, you're afraid that people will judge you, or you will judge yourself, which is based on society's assumption that humans are lacking and flawed. And it's true that there's chains of thought, but there's a chain of after the first thought, but there's also chains that go way back that caused the first thought, the current first thought. If you just keep nipping away at the current thoughts, then it's like pruning a weed. You want to dig it out, go deeper.
Once you can become mindful, which is to just be aware of what's arising in consciousness without judgment, without reaction, without resistance.
Without judgment, without reaction, and without resistance. Well, he's judging it already. He doesn't want to be affected by the thoughts because they're painful. Reaction, well, going on a big mindfulness project's a reaction, and it's not pro-action. It's not based on looking for the cause. It's just, oh, I don't like that, I've got to figure a way to cope with it. And resistance, well, the method involves not resisting the thought and just, letting it come and go. That's good, but it's much deeper to understand it. I went through a lot of this trying various techniques to make life better. It never works, or if it does work, it becomes stale, but you get enough rewards to keep you going. It never ultimately satisfies because it can't. Anything gained can be lost, or it becomes stale. It's only the innate happiness of being that's reliable.
To be able to notice anxiety as just a pattern of sensation in the body.
Well, in that moment, it's just a form of energy, you could say. But to treat it just as it's appearing in the moment is very shallow. You got to go for the cause.
Or even the anxiety you feel before you get on a roller coaster, right? If that's your thing, is something you're willing to pay to do.
Well, reframing, that's another coping technique. All these techniques that people come up with are just coping. It's like whistling in the dark. We've got to get to the causes.
Unlock from all of that and recognize that consciousness itself, that which is simply aware of experience, is not actually changed by its contents.
There's a popular idea in spirituality, New Age spirituality, of spiritual bypassing, which is when people use techniques or rationalizations or whatever to avoid dealing with the nitty-gritty of life. And I think that's what this is. You just go, oh, consciousness is unchanged and cool, I don't have to worry anymore. That's true and good, but it's only part of the story. You're not dealing with the whole issue when you're just jumping to the emphasis on consciousness.
Right, and on some level, it's not diminished by sadness or improved by joy. And you keep dropping back into that state. And paradoxically and happily, that state begins to have its own kind of qualitative character, which is more toward the good side of things. I mean, it's more joyful and compassionate and loving and positive. And then notice that the physiology, which still may take a few seconds to dissipate, is fine, right? Like it's fine to feel that way. It's like it has no more meaning in that moment.
But why do all these meditators have a meditator's posture? I mean, you see them when they walk on stage or something like that. There's a stiffness about them, a robotic aspect to them. That's because they're always doing this thing of looking inside. Oh, what am I feeling? And am I calm or am I not calm? I mustn't be doing mindfulness properly, or I've got to look like a meditator. I've got to look wise. So that's not freedom. They're not free, I don't think. And all the meditators and all the ones that belong to the various religions like Buddhism and that, they're all like that. And it's really sad. They're reacting to the problem of thought rather than understanding the whole story, how we got distracted from the innate happiness of being, where the karma of the current thoughts started.
You don't feel pain in the knee and abstract from those unpleasant sensations back upon yourself and think, I'm such a schmuck, right? Like, well, who am I? How did I become this person?
Well, so he's saying that thoughts can lead to negative self-esteem, but the negative self-esteem starts with society saying that human beings are lacking and flawed. So society says that from babyhood. Then we take that on. Everything after that's there's going to be this dilemma around self-esteem. Am I good enough? Am I not good enough? Am I good? Am I bad? Am I doing the right thing, the wrong thing? Am I screwing up? And the current thoughts that are interpreting your failures or successes, they're just a symptom. They're not the cause. The cause goes way back. And also, it's an overarching social context that we're in that makes us continue with the negative view of ourselves and humankind. Society's constantly saying, you got to do better, you got to do good, you got to watch out for doing bad. No.
That you're this person who didn't work out, right? In the end, people fall into that hole again and again, right? And
but why? Isn't it interesting that we do fall into that hole? And it's also interesting that we don't figure out why. Oh my God, it's because we've all inherited this ancient idea that human beings are lacking and flawed.
It's not just sort of unnecessary, it's completely unnecessary. And, mindfulness is a tool that would allow you to discover that.
Isn't it funny that we will do every imaginable trick and coping technique that takes so much time and work, yet we never think to go back and dig to the first cause of it all, which is society's illusion that humans are lacking and flawed. And also, Sam's mindfulness app has mindfulness for kids. It's training kids from a very young age to look inwards in a particular way, the mindfulness way. So if the kid begin to question things and look within, they won't look in a fresh way, they'll look in a way that they've been conditioned to look. So I object to the teaching mindfulness to children. They say it's optional though, the kid's got to want it. But, the parents are modelling it and presenting it, and they're keen about it. I hope I've made my point that mindfulness and all other forms of meditation fail to get to the ultimate cause of our problems. And if we do dig to the ultimate cause, we'll find that it's created by human beings based on the illusion that we're lacking and flawed. And that if we remove that illusion, all the problems it causes will evaporate. Okay, thanks for watching.